So good morning, everybody. Thank you for your valuable time and attendance today. It's an absolute pleasure to be representing METI Startup Hub in the organization of this webinar. I'm Taina Mujithia. I'm a lawyer by qualification and profession and on board with METI Startup Hub as a legal consultant. This webinar has been hosted and organized in conjunction with our esteemed partners, Singh & Singh. Singh & Singh Law Firm is an Indian law firm with years of experience in providing services inter alia in the field of intellectual property law, media and telecommunications laws, arbitration, competition law, law of taxation, drugs and regulatory laws. With a highly qualified and experienced team, Singh & Singh brings to its foray a team of expert legal professionals, and the firm can identify the core of a client's issues to provide suitable solutions. Thank you to our esteemed partners. Our topic and agenda for the discussion today is Atmanirbhar Legal and Regulatory Marathon for the Indian startup community. We will have three technical sessions today. I request all the attendees to post their queries or their questions in the chat box, and they will be all taken up right at the end. I also request everybody to switch off their video and their audio, and you will be by turn asked to speak. So today's focus that I would like to put on would be the Government of India's focus on promoting technology innovation, startups, and creation of intellectual properties. We all know that the last decade has seen a spike in technological evolution, particularly in India. Especially given the pandemic year that we have gone through, technology startups have seen a boom, and the need for virtual technology has been felt and necessitated in all aspects and sectors that govern human life and society. However, certain schools of thought have felt that India has still not been able to realize its full innovative potential due to a fragmented innovative ecosystem. However, the Government of India in this direction has been taking many initiatives towards strengthening the innovation ecosystem. The most pertinent of them being the establishment of the National Innovation Council, whose mandate has been to coordinate various innovation-related activities. The new Science and Technology and the Innovation Policy of 2013, which was intended to promote entrepreneurship and science-led solutions for sustainable and inclusive growth. India is destined to take a big leap towards innovation-led growth with all these activities. The current national ecosystem in India is vast and complex, comprising of knowledge producers such as science and technology institutions, academia, and innovating individuals and knowledge users. Various governments in India from time to time have given priority to science, technology, and innovation, and therefore India has evolved as a largely public-funded R&D structure. In India, the innovation ecosystem includes the entire national innovation ecosystem, inclusive of individual innovators and entrepreneurs, mentors, government policies, angel venture capital, investors, institutional and industrial funding mechanisms, intellectual property rights mechanisms, technology transfer mechanisms, market inputs, and incentives. Thus, from what we have seen, that the functional goal of our Indian innovation ecosystem was always intended to enable technology development and innovation. The latest statistics indicate India's stupendous growth with a huge jump in our rank on the GIPC index. There are certain challenges that have been gauged, especially from the Indian standpoint that we face. These can be summarized as follows. We have, it is felt by certain schools of thought that we have a fragmented policy and policy implementation, and the Government of India is taking a lot of measures to streamline this. There is still felt that there is an inadequate funding in the R&D sector, difficulty in lengthy funding procedures, angel and venture capital and seed funding, weak linkages between stakeholders which need strengthening. A more conducive education system is necessitated. A better infrastructure is necessitated in tier 2, tier 3, and our villages. And also, it is felt that there is still a risk aversion among entrepreneurs, and more can be done to streamline the intellectual property landscape of the country. The Government of India had declared 2010 to 2020 as a decade of innovation. Recently, also under our Honorable Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi ji-led government at the center, many flagship projects were launched under varied ministries to boost the innovation, technology, and startup ecosystem. From time to time, we have seen the government taking action. Some programs that can be noted particularly by other ministries would include schemes created by various other ministries like Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Information Technology and Research Academy from the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. We've also had the Cell for Intellectual Property Rights and Management under Ministry of Commerce and Industry for promotion of IPR. We have Startup India under Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and an outfit like Agni for boosting science and innovation also under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Pertinent initiatives taken by our ministry, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, would include the National Innovation Foundation, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research Innovation Complexes. We have also had technology development and demonstration programs, patent assistance programs operated by the Technology Information Forecasting and System Council and the National Research Development Corporation. And we also have a Centers of Excellence IP team under CDAC Pune, which is under the flagship and aegis of MeitY to provide a gamut of IPR related services. The most recent initiative in this regard being MeitY Startup Hub, or MSH, that was established under the flagship of MeitY and officially launched in October 2019 in the august presence of our Honorable Union Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, mandated to enhance and strengthen the tech startup ecosystem of India. In the capacity of being on board with MSH, we as a team envision to take MSH ahead, and so that it is a key enabler and of vital importance in placing India as a coveted global startup hub destination. In consonance with our slogan, innovate, connect, collaborate, let's make technology transform and integrate. I sincerely look forward to enriching and enlightening sessions ahead with our eminent panelist speakers and offer heartfelt gratitude to Sing and Sing for their unrelentless partner support towards our cause. Our panelist speaker for the first session would be Mr. Rajesh Ramaya, partner, Premji Invest. Sir has been in investment office of Mr. Azim Premji, chairman of Wipro, and his philanthropic initiatives. Since 2017, he has been a CFO and operating partner of the fund across listed equities and private equity. Since the beginning of 2018, he has taken on the role of an investing partner in the private investment scheme, leading its investments in automotive and industrial sectors, apart from managing its foray into special situation opportunities. Sir has been a part of the core team at Premji Invest and represents Premji Invest in the board and committees of its portfolio companies. Over to you, Mr. Ramaya.
Thank you, Taina. And it's a pleasure talking to all on this August forum. I hope I'm audible. I'll start my video as well, if that helps people to kind of see me better as well. So the thought process here is to kind of give a brief background of what we are seeing on the investment landscape here, and what we as investors look for in companies, and what's the various aspects of investments which we look at in terms of rights, the founders' interactions, and some of those things. And then we'll be open to having a question and answer if that if time allows to do so. First of all, I would say that we as investors are extremely encouraged by the kind of entrepreneurship which we are seeing in the country, the number of companies which are coming up, and the kind of entrepreneurs who are coming up is extremely satisfactory. The way we are seeing progress happening, and we are also seeing both almost like new generation entrepreneurs which are almost like pass out of colleges wanting to start a new company rather than going and working for a big multinational like a Microsoft or a Google. And that's a very encouraging fact for us. At the same time, experienced entrepreneurs who have been in professional roles in various large companies, as well as people who have started and kind of exited the company, creating their next set of companies, are also increasing. So overall, I would say the ecosystem in terms of the number of startups, how they're developing is pretty good. To give some examples, I'm part of some of angel networks where we used to see probably one deal in 15 days before. Now we are seeing almost 3 deals every week. So that's the kind of delta change which has happened over the last 24 months. So it's significant traction which we are seeing. And to support that entrepreneurial activity, we are also seeing the ecosystem from an investment perspective developing well. When I say ecosystem, one is the investment, the other one is the support systems for the startups as well. So be it angels, be it seed funds, VC funds, PE funds, they're all coming up well. The whole last 5 years, we have seen a significant shift in the whole investment landscape where a lot of startups are now getting funded by Indian angels, Indian seed funds, rather than only the global seed funds. So if you go back 5-6 years, probably there are only a few global funds which are operating in India, but over the last 5 years, a lot more of Indian funds have started, where the capital contribution of Indian families and Indian high net worth individuals have increased significantly, and that's a good thing, because the people have started looking at taking risk in some of these opportunities and thereby supporting this whole startup ecosystem. I would also say the ecosystem on the support aspects, be it many companies have now started off providing secretarial, financial, CFO services to many of these startups, because the startup and the founder may not have all the capabilities to do everything on their own. So it's required that there are support systems, support ecosystems for them to take care of some of these aspects. That's also developing well. And the third big aspect is also the whole government initiative around the startup ecosystem over the last 5-10 years, in terms of various aspects of support, be it in terms of tax benefits, funding. We have had the scheme through which SIDBI has been funding many of the funds, which in turn fund the startups. We have had technology funding initiatives, and also a lot more initiatives by the government, which Taina had highlighted about. But what we would like to see more is one aspect where a lot of funding happens today more on business model innovation. We would like to see a lot more innovation happening from a technology and product perspective. I think there, while a lot of work is happening, we probably can do a lot more in this area, and the quantum of funding, the kind of risk involved there is a lot more higher. To that extent, we need a lot more government support in some of these initiatives to kind of take those risks, because many individuals or funds may not want to take such risks at early stages. And I have a classic example of what we had seen. I had an in-between stint with a startup in an electric car company called Reva in 2008. It's around the same time when Tesla started, right? So Tesla got a government support of $500 million to fund that whole organization, and you know where Tesla is today vis-a-vis what Reva is today. So some of these initiatives on the innovation side, on the product side, on the technology side need a lot more funding, a lot more risk taking. So there, we would need probably a lot more government support if you have to take this to even greater heights. That's the broad thing which I've been seeing. Things like NIIF, which has now come into a little bit later stage kind of funding, is a classic example of how now a lot more companies on the infra side are getting funded, and that kind of initiative probably should be looked at even from by creating a fund specifically for the technology initiatives, which is independently run as such. So that's something which we would like to see. Moving on, in terms of what we see as key aspects of the whole, when we look as investors, what do we see? What do we want to see in entrepreneurs is this whole idea which they bring onto the table. What is the uniqueness of the table, of the idea on the table? What are the opportunities for growth in those ideas? And how strong is the conviction the founder and the team is building around with him along to drive those initiatives? So those are important aspects of what we look at when we look at the investment opportunity. There is always a push and pull on the valuation side. Valuation is more an art than a science, because what we see as value vis-a-vis what somebody else as an investor sees as value may be completely different because of the risk perception which each of us have in our own thought process. I would say that that's always going to be like that, and the focus from an entrepreneur perspective should be to ensure that they are adequately funded and not worry about only the dilution, the initial aspects, because once they have the initial amount of funding and are able to scale up to a certain level in terms of what their idea is, then after that things get a lot more easier. So the initial rounds of funding are always challenging, but once that gets established and that rolls out in terms of product, then it's much more easier. Life gets easier as you go along. At least from a funding perspective, it gets challenging more from an operation perspective of scaling up. But the funding ecosystem across the VC and PE system, PE ecosystem is much more developed in the country vis-a-vis the early stage, which is the angel and the seed kind of round. So, and we are seeing some of the startups getting funded through friends and families and the networks, but that's still, I would say, a small kind of set of companies which gets through that funding. And typically when we kind of get into this valuation debate, there are multiple aspects of the whole commercial discussions when things go on with founders, be it in terms of rights, what we get, be it in terms of thought process of what the founder is thinking of this company, whether they would kind of want to build this out to take it to an IPO over a 10 years time period, or would they think of a strategic exit at a point in time because it is better housed in a larger ecosystem. Some of those things we have discussions with the founders in the initial stages to just to get an understanding of what their thought process is. It's not that things are always fructified at such early stages, because many of these thoughts, ideas also evolve as they go along into the journey. But at least when they come to a stage of where they are raising funds for a Series B, Series C round, that clarity comes in as such, and then that's where we discussed as to how things will be set up for an exit for us. Because one of the key aspects which investors, not like us, but more like a PE fund, because we are kind of a fund which is kind of proprietary in nature. We have a much more longer term horizon. But funds which are typically private equity funds or VC funds have a specific horizon of 7-8 years in which they have to exit an investment, and hence they put in obligations on the founders to ensure that they are exited, right? So and that is where a difference can be made, where funds like us, some of the government initiatives on funding some of these startups can have a much more longer term horizon to kind of give a leeway to the companies to hold on for longer. In terms of the rights which we seek are standard set of rights. What we typically seek is minority protection rights, I would say. Most of the investors don't like to get into the issue of the operating management, right? So they are typically on the board. They ask for board rights or board observer rights. They try and help the management to bring in more professionals as they grow and become larger. They also, so to that extent, they may have some say in what kind of profile of people where they hire at senior management level. They would want to have a view on if there are an opportunity to acquire other companies or invest in large capex. Then some of those aspects the investors again would want to get a view into, and they will have some voting rights with those aspects, and standard rights of tagging along with the founder if the founder is selling his shares, or at a particular point in time if the business is not going well, or if the time frame for the investors have kind of passed out, then they will also have a drag right on the founder. So these are some of the standard rights which we always have a discussion with founders at different points in time and ensure these are adequately covered in the investment documents which we sign with the founders. One of the key issues which we always face is with respect to companies is as they scale up, there are a lot more requirements of professionals who have worked on scaling companies to come in, because what we see is there are young entrepreneurs who come and start up a company. They're very good. They do an excellent job of getting a company to a X stage, but from the subsequent stage, it becomes more a scaling issue, more execution issue, where we need to get in a lot more professionals to kind of come in and support that growth. And that is where we see many new generation founders are not able to kind of adapt to the ecosystem where they bring in more professionals to scale up, because at the end of the day, what we need is the company to succeed. It's not about a person being in a role of a CEO or a CFO or a CTO. It's about the company having the right sort of people at different points in time to scale the company to make it much larger, because at the end of the day, the founder does take all the credit in terms of him bringing up the idea and scaling up the company to a certain stage, and also making adequate financial returns out of that whole risk one has taken. With that, I will kind of wind down and will be happy to answer questions if there are any at this stage. China?
Yes, so thank you, sir. Would anybody from the audience have any questions? You could either ask them right now, or you could post your queries in the chat box. We could take it and attend to all of them right at the end. Would that be also all right, Ramaya, sir?
Aina, we have a live question request. If you permit, can we take a live question?
Absolutely, we're open to both.
Mr. Vikram Saigal, can you unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, sir. My name is Vikram. I am the founder of FitBuddy. My question is regarding the valuation. As you rightly said, there is a pull and pull between founder and investor regarding the valuation. Have you ever come across a situation where a founder was undervaluating his funds and you ended up advising him that what is the right valuation for you? Because as a founder, at times we are somewhere in the muddy grounds to come up with the final figure. So have you ever come across a situation where as an investor you see that there is a lot more than what the founder is quoting, and then you ended up advising him on mentoring him?
Vikram, that rarely happens, because most of the founders these days are extremely smart. They at least talk to 5 different investors and get a view of valuation from each of those different investors, and based on that they get a range of what they think, and then 5 different eyes view that. There is a ballpark estimate of what they think as the value, because at a very early stage, what the valuation is also based on what the future of the company is, right? It's not based on what you have created, it's based on the idea and how large that idea can become and how easily is it executable. And to that extent, there are companies which are just on business plan valued even $100 million or even $1 million, right? So that kind of variation can happen. But typically, it depends on the founder, and the founders would have had multiple discussions with different investors before they come along. So rarely we see a case where the founders kind of value themselves low.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you, Taina. I think we can take the rest of the questions later.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to now introduce our next speaker for our next session, Mr. K.R. Pradeep, partner Singh & Singh Law Firm. Sir is a graduate in business management, a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and has practiced as a chartered accountant for over 30 years of experience, presently heading the tax law practice of Singh & Singh. Sir had secured 10th rank in the Bachelor's of Business Management, 22nd rank in Inter CA, and 8th rank in Final CA, securing the President's felicitation for scoring 100 in advanced accountancy in Final CA. Sir's practice includes litigation and advisory in tax-related matters, and regularly Sir appears before the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, Settlement Commission, and the like. Over to you, Pradeep, sir.
Thank you, Tanya, for a very warm introduction. Good morning to all of you. On a Friday morning, discussing a subject like tax, I don't know whether it is going to create enthusiasm or kind of wariness. Let me try and make it as simple as possible. While addressing this subject, I also would like to place before you a few aspects of how this subject has to be understood. When it comes to India, when you say startup, and if you say that startup has to be defined, you almost end up having a laugh. Why I say laugh? Because 70 years ago, when we achieved our independence, every aspect of economic activity in India was a startup. And then some businesses have matured, and then a lot more businesses are yet to be matured. With the millions and millions and millions of educated graduates and educated populace coming out of your educational institution and universities, the most of India is a startup. And to define actually the definition of startup in India should be on a different way. What is already not started is startup would be a better definition than putting a definition to a startup. Why I am advocating this line of thought is because the opportunity available in India, which many a times is categorized as problem, is enormous. When more than 100 million educated hands are available, either who are employed or underemployed or not having adequate skill, which requires skill improvement, and then if you put them into the job market in India and globally, and also they hit the shores of entrepreneurship, then you see what what kind of impact it will have. When the Honorable Prime Minister said that India object is to have a $5 trillion economy within a defined time, I for one felt it is highly achievable. The means for achievement of that target undoubtedly rests on the startups. Why I say this? Because if you see in the impact of COVID, just 1 year ago, the most of the economists and political leaders, global leaders, were of the view that this is a kind of a challenge to the economy which was never seen before, at least not till the time the Second World War came to an end. So it is almost a in the last 1 century, such kind of a challenge was not seen. Most economies degrew, and the future looked very bleak. And today, 1 year later, when we are looking, what we are seeing is there is almost a palpable enthusiasm. The economy around the world has come back on its heel and looking for a very solid growth. This 1 year period when we hit a kind of a rough patch, what exactly pulled the global economy and the Indian economy out of this morass and out of this challenge? When you take a look at it, you will see it is the startups globally and in India which kind of created the framework for India to move ahead and globe to look at a solid growth. If you see in the month of May or June of last year, when the stock markets were down in the dump and policymakers were wondering as to how to give the impetus for the economy, and suddenly a huge amount of forex came, invested in many of the new technologies which few years ago were startups. And it is this investment which swelled the foreign exchange coffers in RBI and also created such an amount of mountain of liquidity in India that the borrowing cost went down, and people found there is a new opportunity, a lot more money left in the hands of individuals and corporates. And of course, government did the right thing by increasing the fiscal deficit, etc. So what I mean to say is the emphasis or the responsibility which the startups are shouldering, are likely to shoulder, is one humongous in nature. Now, when we are looking at a $5 trillion economy and a 1.4 billion from the existing $2,000 or $2,200 of the per capita income, we are just likely to move to $3,000. And that's all. At $3,000, we are a $5 trillion economy. Whereas if you take the average annual income or per capita in US or in China, China is about 8,000 and US is about nearly 30,000 plus. So if you are looking at just at 3,000, you are going to be a $5 trillion economy. Still, we are not out of poverty or the low grade insofar as the personal incomes are concerned. Now, the opportunity in the form of startups is, in my view, is the right kind of, is the medicine, is the vaccine for the future of India. Now, the tax provisions are there since 2012 and thereafter a kind of a enabling framework under the Income Tax Act and elsewhere has been created. Now, my first question is, since we are already about 8 years down since the approach has been made, it may be useful before I go into the main subject to see whether we have achieved our objective. One of the things which came for a startup is to provide a kind of a capital gain relief in the case of new investment, what is known as angel investors who invested in these startup companies. And it started as an accident, actually. Today, the investment in a startup, the object from the Commerce Ministry and other economic ministry is to give massive impetus to startup. Whereas when it comes to Finance Ministry, which has framed the Income Tax Act, the view on the startup is one of skepticism, suspicion, and doubt. Why it has happened? Because the main provision for giving impetus for startup, which is when you invest in a startup, what kind of a taxation it will come, not from the capital gains. Today, the framework is such that even if a new investor were to invest in a startup, at the very beginning, the startup has to pay tax, which is known as the angel tax. Now, this provision, section 56, wherein this valuation game has been inserted, is an anti-abuse, anti-laundering, anti-so many things, actually. So the situation was that there was large-scale money laundering happening. And the Finance Ministry felt that such money laundering need to be curbed and rightfully so. So when they did that, when they tried to attack the black money and money laundering, they brought in this section 56, and any investment made into that company above the fair value, that difference between the fair value and the invested amount was immediately brought to tax. So if you receive $100 and the fair value is $20, $80 is brought to tax pronto, immediately. So that acted as a very big impediment for the startup growth, though the object of the government was to give a big impetus to it. Now, stuck in that mud of anti-laundering, anti-money laundering provision, certain exceptions have been carved out. So when the overall view is to curb money laundering, black money under any circumstance, they came out with a very, very strict and a very tough provision. And the exception to startup is out of such a kind of an ironclad provision, and there they have just juiced out a few things to create a framework for startup. So my first submission is that the very, very idea that a startup should be carved out of a provision on a money laundering section itself is somewhat militates against the object of commerce ministry. And I humbly pray that commerce ministry and finance ministry work out a better framework, because we are looking at some 100 million people coming into the job market and the entrepreneur market. And then investment, there's a plenty of investment available today globally and in India because of a huge monetary expansion which has taken place. India is in a rightful place to attract that, and our tax provision should not be a kind of a deterrent to get those monies. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity for attracting the global investment and also Indian investment towards the startup. Because if you see the digital economy as it is emerging, it is affecting every walk of life. Every bit that we are doing, the digital economy is challenging it, and then something new is coming. Now, first of all, what is the challenge before India? The challenge before India is to absorb the digital changes and bring that and make it into something usable for the people in the market, and create a kind of enterprises economies which is profitable, scalable. And when I say scalable, first of all, you have to cater to India and then take it forward. The case in example is recently Reliance said that they will provide 5G technology to the globe as a direct challenge to China. So such scaling up efforts will, in my view, happen in a lot many areas. Telecom is one area. Then there is a mobile telephony, and there is so many consumer durables like TV, telephones, washing machines, etc., which is being produced in Korea, China, everywhere else, and then that is being brought to India. And similarly, many different type of cutting edge technology in AI, cyber security, in so on and so forth is already there is a technology leap forward in India, and the tax provisions need to understand that. The existing Section 56, simply as I said, is that as you receive the investment, the difference between the fair market value and the amount received as investment, that is immediately open for taxation. And an exemption is given to a few companies, which the section has very clearly said a company should be a private limited company, partnership, or a LLP. If you are already listed, then this is not available. And turnover for any of the financial year since incorporation should not exceed 100 crores. And it should be working towards innovation, development, or improvement of product or process or services or business model of an entity is scalable and high potential of employment generation or wealth creation. This is very noble object, and it should not be found by splitting up or a reconstruction of an existing business. And most important, the most defining factor here is that your application will go to the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, and who will give an approval. Once an approval is given by DPIIT, I think you are in a safer zone. And this is a very good move. And I'm told DPIIT receives many multiple applications every day, and they are also on the forefront of clearing ASAP, and has created such an enabling, such a friendly environment that when I speak to many startups, they feel that they have had a song and dance while getting the approval, and that is a real kudos to the department. Statistics wise, 27,158 startups have already been registered with the DPIIT till now, of which 264 startups are funded by SIDBI. 27,158 is not a small number. I am told the startup ecosystem in India is just second to what is happening in US, which is the largest startup ecosystem in the world. The way it is going, I'm sure in a year or two, maybe 3 years, India will emerge as the startup, the best or the largest startup ecosystem in the world. A lot more things need to be done, especially in terms of looking at the applicability of Section 56, because the startups require a lot of investment. And if the investment itself is taxed and taken out even before a dollar is earned or something is done, then on the face of it, it looks that requires a complete change in makeover. I would urge and beg that the startup funding should be dealt in a very different framework rather than Section 56, stuck in a anti-money laundering provision. And that, I think, in my view, will increase the user acceptability and user enablement. What is happening today is a number of startups have received notices from income tax saying that you received this investment and you are liable for tax. And even as they receive the notice, many of these are young entrepreneurs or technocrats who have no idea earlier about a finance or income tax. And when they receive that, it is a very, very shocking shocking emotion that they have. And we cannot find fault for issuing a notice because the law is as it is. It is so. Many challenges are faced when it comes to valuation. Valuation is done on a DCF or on a what is called a net asset value method. When it is done on a DCF, you have a discounted cash flow, which takes note of the future potential growth, and then the discounting factor and the profit, etc. it is arrived at. Most of the litigation is that when you make a projection of a turnover or a service receipt, looking into the future, and based on which if you have been funded by an investor, and as the time goes, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and by the time when you receive the notice 3 years down the line, it is possible, in most cases, it is possible that those projections have not turned out to be true. So if you have projected, let us say $1 million as the turnover, and based on which the DCF model has been created, and then if your turnover is, let us say 200,000 or 300,000, there is a solid, empirical, verifiable, evidenceable case that your investment has been overvalued on a hindsight. Now, when this type of facts emerge, the tax authorities will definitely look into and ask, you are very misleading or ambitious in taking the investment, or this the froth in investment, what you have got itself comes within the four corners of the Section 56, and you are liable for tax. And most of the litigation is going towards it. So maybe a kind of an enabling environment needs to be created. The government is aware of this, and in fact, they came out with a statement that whatever tax demand created on this account, they will not enforce it for a certain period of time. I think presently the recovery is somewhat, there is a relief on recovery, but how this will translate into a better enabling environment is something to be seen. My own suggestion is that immediately, if an effort is made and some kind of a ameliorating atmosphere is created, I think one of the basic and main concerns of a startup, especially when they receive the funds, that would get addressed. The second is, as you are doing the business in startup, you have to exercise what expenditure, because in the beginning there will be a lot more developmental expenditure, and before even you clock a first crore of your billing, lot more money is spent, and then that goes as a revenue expenditure. And if you claim it as a revenue expenditure, what happens is that over a period of 8 years, such revenue expenditure, if you are not able to absorb in the terms of profit, then that will lapse. So one of the ways that we have dealt is that many of these developmental expenditure is capitalized, and you create a IPR asset in your balance sheet. And on that IPR asset, the day you start actually billing, you can claim depreciation on this, and the depreciation will give you a little longer tenure in terms of claim against adjustment for your profits. And when you handle this issue very smartly, it is possible that your tax liability permitted within the law may get into a optimal zone rather than a suboptimal zone. This is one area where the startups can easily kind of exercise their discretion when it comes to right accounting policy. Then you have other benefits in the form of section 80 IAC, which is that with you are eligible to claim 100% exemption on the profits earned from a startup for 3 consecutive years out of the 7 years from the date of incorporation. And the other conditions are it should have been incorporated after 1st of April 2016, but before 1st of April 2021. Year in which you claim the deduction, your turnover should not exceed more than 25 crores. And the other conditions is that it should not be found by splitting up or reconstruction of a business already in existence. It should not be found by a transfer of a new business of machinery or plant previously used. It holds a certificate of eligible business from Interministerial Board of Certification. It is engaged in innovation, development, or improvement of product or processes or services, or a scalable business model with a high potential of employment generation or wealth creation. This is one of the very good provisions because 3 years of profit is going to be exempt, and the choice is given when you will start. In the beginning, when your profits are low, you need not exercise this, because in a block of 7 years, 3 years is given. So even if you start exercising when the business is a little more mature, or when your depreciation claims are fully absorbed, and then when you start claiming this will be a very significant benefit. I am sure this section 80 IAC will be relooked and remodeled based on the experience. And if the same benefit as envisaged under section 10A is somewhat, if this section also is made pari materia for benefit for 10 years instead of just 3 years, then it is possible for the companies which are initially startups to achieve the global scale. Because one of the objects for recognition as a startup which is eligible for 80 IAC is that it must be engaged in innovation, development, etc., and high potential for employment generation and wealth creation. When such a big object is included here, if you create a longer period of tax enablement, I think that will go align well with the award objective with the tax relief, and there is a case for relook at this. Then again, the startups are given a major relief in the form of relaxed provisions for set off and carry forward of losses in the form of section 79. As you know, when there is a change in the controlling interest, then the losses of a privately held company gets lapsed. Here, they have made the condition very usable, very amiable, and by putting just 2 conditions, that 51% of the shareholders must continue, or continuity of the 100% of the original shareholders. This is one of the best provisions, I would say. This creates a very enabling environment. How it is useful? Because when you have started something, and then you incur a loss, and then you receive a subsequent funding because your product or your service has been found to be highly innovative, and finding a market acceptance, and you need further investment. When the dilution happens, even if the dilution happens 90% in favor of the new investor, so long as the original investors remain invested from their original investment, the entire provision is made available. This is one of the very salutary relief, one of the most needed and very appropriate relief. I really thank the government for bringing this. This was brought in 2009. very, very thoughtful, and it's one of the path breakers, I would say, in terms of this, and this highly usable and highly useful. Then there is a exemption in the form of section 54 GB, where when you sell your residential property and invest in a startup, up to 50 lakhs, subject to certain other conditions, those investment, the capital gain on the residential property which you have sold will be exempt. And there is also one more aspect which is very important. That is, India is from 130 or so a case, ease of business, doing business in India. Now we have moved to somewhere in 70s. I'm hopeful that in the next 3 to 5 years, we will be in the within the 10 best ease of doing business in the world. One of the reasons why we achieved from 130 to 70 is because there is a great awareness at the ministry and at the government level that enabling environment is a must. And towards that, even CBDT has created a grievance redressal cell, wherein even if you just send a simple mail outlining what your problems are, you will be amazed to see the speed at which it is responded, and the relief which is given, extremely satisfying. I have seen so many clarifications which is coming. Initially, we thought it is going to be a bureaucratic stonewalling, and just usual answers and things like that. Refreshingly different is that we are seeing clarifications coming, almost hand-holding and helping the people, the startups, and you get a sense that there's a total alignment of the startup environment with the thinking of the government. Not only just thinking, many a time the thinking gets frustrated at the time of implementation, and in this case I think it is a seamless working, and this is one of the great examples as to how enabling provision has been made and how it has been implemented. And these are some of the tax provisions. I could go on, but I think for the moment, this would be good. Thank you all. Thank you, Tanya, for giving me this opportunity.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for an enlightening session. We are open to live questions as well, or we could take them at the end.
Anna, we don't have any live question
All
requests
right,
as of now.
great. We'll proceed if that's all right. Our next session would be on ESOP and sweat equity. It will be taken up by Mr. P.V. Srinivasan. To introduce Mr. Srinivasan, sir has experience over 18 years as head of corporate tax in Wipro Limited, Bangalore, and with over 35 years of hands-on experience in the industry with regard to corporate tax compliance across tax jurisdictions, including US, Europe, India, and Asia Pacific, London, Latin America, and Africa, addressing structuring requirements, cross-border mergers and acquisitions, business reorganizations, transfer pricing, taxation of IPRs, and so on and so forth. It's our pleasure, sir, to have you on board with us. Over to you, sir.
Anna, Mr. Srinivasan will be joining soon. There's some technical snag at his end.
We'll just wait for sir to join in.
Yes, we're coordinating with him. We're trying to fix it. Just give us a minute or so.
Pradeep, sir, would you like to continue, please?
I can until Srinivasan joins. I think you need to enable me.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, start my video.
Mr. Pradeep, sorry to interrupt. We have a live question request. Can I take a
Yeah.
live question, sir? Mr. Raj Dupal, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, producer, giving an very wonderful information. And as in a startup, we usually don't go into this kind of thing, where profit or maybe what kind of schemes are available and all. So mostly we are focusing on the product and development and sales. So can we get some kind of information where it is readily available? And we can opt, because I have wrote down something but I missed some of the parts of the schemes. So can we get somewhere the information about the startup tax benefit schemes?
Raj, the startup tax benefit schemes is embedded in various sections under the Income Tax Act. They have not produced any specific what do I say listing out, but there are many articles and expert comments which is written like a 2-pager. You will get a complete picture of that we could send it to you, or I can get you to a particular this thing. What is most important for you, I would say is, are you registered with DPIIT?
Yes, sir. Yes, we are registered the DPIIT, and it's almost 50th year we are running our startup.
Oh, very good, very good. That is one of the most important, because DPIIT is holding the field admirably well.
Yes.
My huge compliment to that department. And under the Income Tax Act, as I said, we could send you a flyer or something giving you various provisions which are applicable to the startups, and you can take a look at what would be useful to you.
Yes, sir. Sure.
So, Tanya PVS, I think, is here. You want me to continue, or he will?
Yes, sir. If you have something to say, please continue, and sir could take it forward from this.
Yeah. So, just to place importance of what a startup can achieve. You see the global valuation in NASDAQ or US. The main technology companies carries a 27% weight in the US stock market. The GDP of United States of America is estimated around $21 billion. And the market cap of all Dow, NASDAQ, S&P all put together is in the region of around 55 trillion. That is roughly about 2.6 times the GDP of US. And 27% to 28% of this $55 trillion is the valuation of the technology companies. And you will see, if you read those names, most of the technology companies are just about 8 or 10 years. So 27% of $55 trillion in one stock market is roughly about $15 trillion. And the Indian GDP is $2.8 trillion. So the technology company valuation in US is 6 times the GDP of India. Just to give you, India is known as a knowledge economy. Knowledge is there, economy is there, but the problem is knowledge is not connected to the economy. When knowledge gets connected to the economy, this distortion of India just being a $2.8 trillion economy, and the others, which is a 1/6 of our population, has something like about 20 times bigger the market cap. Those distortions need to go, and the policy establishment has to address this. When I say this is the, for example, this is the target. Now, I would urge the government that aside of the Indian GDP going to $5 trillion, I would request the government to put a separate target that the startup should contribute at least $5 trillion in the next 5 years or so, or $10 trillion in the next 10 years, and do everything from that point of view. I think then we would achieve a far greater success than what is being thought about now. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Srinivasan, sir, over to you, please.
Yeah, I'm audible and visible.
Yes, absolutely, sir.
Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Startup is what we are seeing every day. The topic which I've been allocated is to talk about ESOP and sweat equity. And in the context of a startup, it's actually the currency. Normally, a very well grown up company, healthy financials, will be able to pay its employees using its own cash resources because it would not like to trade off its value in the shares. It would like to pay the shares value of the services of employees only through cash remuneration. And that has been the norm for many years. But for a startup, which is struggling to raise finance, the earlier speakers have talked about how to raise finance, what is the difficulty in raising a finance, what are the challenges which a promoter would face. All these things have been discussed. Obviously, it is not that the promoters can bring adequate cash to remunerate all the employees. So it is going to take some time before the promoters can just start generating cash for paying salaries also. So in that context, today we are going to talk about ESOP and sweat equity as the measures which are normally employed in a startup to remunerate employees. In fact, as we speak, I see many news blogs which essentially say that many startups use ESOP as a mechanism to reward employees across the board. It is not limited to managerial employees. It goes down to even the blue collar employees. In fact, I can see ESOPs is used as a currency to make a payment for salaries across the board in all new startups, which have great valuations. I am seeing that PhonePe virtually has been using ESOP to pay its employees with a strength of more than 2,200 employees. The Bangalore-based startups, some of them have been using ESOPs as a measure to compensate employees. So what is this mechanism of rewarding employees as ESOP? How to do it? Is there a very structured way which the law envisages to administer the ESOP? This is the discussion we are going to have today. Before I go too much deep into the discussion, I would like to make small distinction as to what is the difference between ESOP and sweat equity, because this topic deals with both ESOP as well as sweat equity. ESOP is a mechanism where shares are issued for services. It could be common services. I also talked about blue collar services, or it could also be covered under ESOP program. So it could be across the board. Sweat equity, it is normally used when somebody contributes know-how, or he makes it available, IPRs are made available, or value additions are so substantial in technology space, then he is given a sweat equity kind of compensation. So you'll find that ESOPs and sweat equity are two words which are used synonymously because the treatment in either case is going to be the same, but there's a difference in the sense that ESOP is an issuance of shares for the purpose of services rendered, and it can be employee services of any kind. It can be blue collar services, it can be white collar services, it could be managerial services, and so on and so forth. But as far as sweat equity is concerned, it is normally used when somebody contributes know-how or provides IPRs or value additions in that context. That's the small difference I thought I will place before we go into the topic. How do startups manage and hire to retain top talent? Why top talent? Any talent for that matter, because they would lack cash resources. The promoter is not somebody who is blessed with abundance of cash that he can start a startup. If that were to be so, he would be possibly looking for something bigger rather than a startup. ESOP actively deployed with startup to achieve the few objectives is that you hire the best if possible. In fact, the talent pool is common. Whether the large companies are looking for talent or the small companies or the startups are looking for talent, the talent pool is common. Obviously, the remuneration will be market remuneration. To pay market remuneration, how do you attract talent? The ESOP is the only mechanism in which startups can attract talent. It can hire the best, it can retain the best. The ESOPs tend to make it as a part owner. So employees become part owners in the venture. that gives them a greater impetus because it gives them an entrepreneurial character to the services. ESOP represents the collective faith. For finally, if remuneration is intrinsically linked to the success of the enterprise, then obviously the contributions of each employee would be higher. So how to make it in such a way that the employees would participate in with the commitment of an entrepreneur, whereas to bring the ownership in the employees to the fore, so that the contributions are like a owner. And therefore ESOP is a tool which is, because the remuneration is not immediate, the value accretion would happen over time. So obviously the employees would look for some great rewards at a future point in time. So the continuity of service, the ability to attract, the ability to retain, and the ability to enhance productivity, all these things are collectively served by a ESOP scheme. Normally a company would do, let us look into companies which may fall into two categories: unlisted companies and listed companies. See, a startup may not be a listed company straight away, but it would aspire to be listed at some point in time. A ESOP plan must be drawn as per the company law regulations and the rules thereunder. So there must be a mechanism to have an ESOP plan. How a ESOP should be structured is well articulated in the rules under the Companies Act, and it should adhere to those rules. So when an ESOP is passed, it would need a special resolution because it amounts to issuance of shares. A share issue is something which touches upon the equity of other shareholders. Therefore, any issuance of shares would require a special resolution, which means that 75% majority of the shareholders should approve in a general meeting. So a ESOP plan without the approval of the general meeting may not be possible. So you need all the shareholders or majority of the shareholders should approve an ESOP plan before it could be implemented. It obviously means the promoters would also be participating in approving the ESOP plan. The second part of it, that private companies would be bound by the company law regulations. Listed companies would be bound by the SEBI regulations, which govern the ESOP plan. Companies are accepted to, are enabled to allot ESOP shares. There is the ability to allot ESOP itself means there is a cycle to it. There will be a grant period. There will be a vesting period, which we'll talk about the cycle a little later. So you'll find that the plan under ESOP is slightly different from other allotment of shares. Other allotment of shares may not be contingent. A ESOP is a right, but not an obligation. It means you give a right to the employee to subscribe to the shares, but you don't have the obligation to subscribe to the shares. So we have a different cycle of ESOP. A predetermined value is also allowed even as far as ESOPs are concerned. The value could be the face value, as for even a face value for a share, which is say worth 100 rupees, and the face value is 10 rupees. The ESOP could be very well be issued at 10 rupees, and still the provisions of section 56(2)(7)(b) would not be attracted, because here the services are for valuable consideration. So the issuance of shares to employees is always exempted under these kind of provisions, because there's a valuable consideration which is always received by the company. What are the cycles in an ESOP? There are 5 events in an ESOP plan which should be looked at, and that is what a typical ESOP plan would look at. There will be a grant of an option. So before that, suppose a company wants to have a plan, it will say that it will keep apart a kitty of a number of shares. Suppose a company has 1 lakh shares allotted for earmarked for ESOP, it would announce and get an approval from the shareholders that we are earmarking 1 lakh number of shares which will be issued for ESOP. So that's the earmarking part of it. Then after earmarked and got the approval of the shareholders, the management would try to possibly have a compensation committee if it's possible. If the startup is too small, the management would itself be the compensation committee. Then it will have a grant of option. That means it will select employees and identify those who would be entitled to the ESOP and give an option to them. So 1 lakh shares may be earmarked to be issued to employees, but it's not that all the 1 lakh should be immediately issued. It will keep on identifying the employees from time to time, and it will grant the option to any employee. Suppose an employee X is qualified to receive an option, he would receive a grant letter from the employer saying that you are granted, say, 1,000 shares, and you are entitled to 1,000 shares as per the terms of the grant. The grant doesn't mean that he can immediately go and ask for the shares. there will be a period called vesting period. That means after the grant is given, the employee has to wait for some period during which he will have to render services, continue to render services to the organization, and he will be visited by a new period. Say after 1 year, the vesting period is completed, then he will have the right to acquire the shares, but not the obligation to acquire the shares. So the gap between the grant of option and the vesting of option is called the vesting period. The vesting period is subject to the discretion of the management. It can have different vesting periods, but typically in the ESOP plan, they will have a common denominator to all the employees so that there is no discrimination between employees as to the vesting period. Then once the vesting happens, as there is no obligation here, there's a right which has got vested. That means the employee can acquire the shares or not acquire the shares. So he can keep it, how long he can keep it open, then that's called the exercise period. After the vesting period, the employee will have an exercise period during which he can exercise the option. So after the vesting period, suppose another 3 years are given to give it as an exercise period, then the employee during those 3 years can exercise the options and acquire the shares. So the next period is called the exercise period. Then after exercise of option, the management would proceed to allot, the company would proceed to allot the shares, and the shares will be allotted to the employee. But at the point of exercise of option, the employee will have to pay the exercise price, which was originally stated in the grant letter. So when the grant letter itself, it will be stated as to what is the price which is payable at the point of exercise, and therefore the exercise price will be determined at the point of grant. When the employee makes the exercise, he will pay the amount of grant price, amount of exercise price, and he will receive the shares at the allotment of shares. The shares so received will be the owner, the employee becomes a complete owner of those shares. Those should be normally without any encumbrance, but in a trust mechanism, sometimes they make it encumbered that if they leave the services after the allotment, the shares will return to the trust within a period. Those are all very unique schemes. But normally when an employee receives shares on shares after exercise of an option, it would be free shares like any other share. It will rank pari passu, that is equal to any other share which the company has issued. Then after the allotment of shares, the employee can hold the shares as long as he wants. He need not sell it at all. But still, since it is a compensation which has been paid in the form of shares, there may be a need to sell those shares. So he would sell the shares in the to any other person who is a willing buyer. In unlisted space, it has to be certainly between two parties which are known to each other. In listed shares, you can sell it on the market and have the sale proceeds realized to the market mechanism. So the 5 events which are important in the ESOP cycle is the grant of option, vesting of option, exercise of option, allotment of shares, and finally the sale of shares. It is the right of the vesting of option creates the right of an employee to acquire the shares. The allotment of shares is the event that creates a compensation income in the hands of the employee, and that could be subject to tax depending upon certain provisions which I will read out a little later. So you have 2 events to remember: whether the shares are vested, and after vested they have been exercised. If they have been exercised, whether allotment has been made. If allotment has been made, then the employer as well as the employee have an obligation to determine what is the compensation income or the salary income they have received in the context of the exercise. What would be the vesting period normally? There is no standard period, but typically with experience, people say the vesting period will be 3 to 5 years after the grant period. So it is not necessary. Suppose 1,000 options are given as a part of grant. It is not necessary that all the 1,000 should be capable of being vested immediately after 1 year or 2 years, whatever be the period. It could be graded vesting. So somebody can say 20% will vest at the end of every year. So 20% will vest at the end of the first year. 200 shares will be vesting after at that period. Another 20% at the end of second year means another 200 shares will vest at the point of second year, and so on and so forth. So the vested shares can be collectively exercised in one go. So if there are 2 vesting events which have happened and they have not been exercised, both can be exercised together. So it is not necessary that sequentially the vesting and the exercise should be made. Once the vesting has happened, the exercise of the share option could be made any point in time. The exercise period is also something which will depend on the gap which the employer would like to have. Sometimes they keep it open up to 10 years also, but some employers choose to limit it to 3-4 years. So there's no suspense with the exercise of option. So the employees choose to acquire the shares, or they forego the right to acquire the shares if they are not too inclined. If the enterprise doesn't do well, then obviously the employee would not be inclined to acquire the share because they have to pay the exercise price. And if they are not inclined to pay the exercise price, then they cannot acquire the share. Whether to pay the exercise price and acquire the share or not would depend upon the valuation at that point in time. If the value is below the exercise price, they would not exercise it. If the value is above the exercise price, there will be a tendency to exercise it. The cycles of once the shares are allotted, the income tax normally would recognize it as a event which would recognize the salary income. That means that the exercise happens and the allotment happens. The value of the fair share or the fair market value of the share on the date of allotment will be the value which will be looked at for determining the compensation income, that's the salary income. But of course, the employee would have paid some amount as exercise price. So the amount of value on the date of allotment less the amount of exercise price which has been paid, that would be treated as the perquisite in the hands of the employee, and the employer will be required to deduct tax at source, putting that number into the Form 16. So you will find that the employer is going to deduct tax at source, even though the employee may not have enough of compensation income, cash income. Still, the fact that he has exercised the option and has received shares as shares in allotment of the exercise, you will find that the employer is bound to deduct tax at source. So obviously, the exercise and allotment of shares should be so well planned that there is sufficient income or cash income in the hands of the employee to pay for the taxes. Otherwise, he will be in trouble because he would have exercised the option, but he doesn't have enough cash to pay the taxes. And the employer also is not going to be too liberal in paying the taxes on behalf of the employee. Those are the events which will be requiring very careful monitoring. Startups have a very great problem because they may determine the vesting period very easily, but whether to exercise the option or not would require a lot of coordination between the management and the employees, because there's a value perception, there's a tax incidence also which gets visited. Thankfully for us, there is some amount of leeway which the government has provided in determining when the taxes should be paid. If there's a startup which is registered under the interministerial body which earlier speakers referred to, then it is a startup which would qualify under Section 80 IAC of the Income Tax Act. That means it will be eligible for some tax holiday also. Such a startup may not deduct tax immediately. The employee gets an option that he need not pay the taxes immediately. He can pay the taxes within a period of 48 months from the end of the assessment year in which the original perquisite arose, or he can pay when the shares are sold, or he can pay the shares tax when he is leaving the employment of the current employer. So 3 events are prescribed. 1, 48 months. 2, the sale of shares which have been vested and exercised and allotted. The third one is when the employee leaves the service, whichever is earliest. If the employee leaves services immediately, then the tax is payable immediately. If the employee does not leave immediately, but waits for the sale of share after 5 years, still 5 years is greater than 4 years, tax will not wait beyond 4 years. So at the end of 4 years, the tax will have to be paid. And if the sale happens within 4 years, then again, the tax will not wait beyond for the sale event, and it will have to be paid in the year in which the sale happens. All these are subject to withholding tax. That means the employer must know the events, and he will have to deduct tax at source and remit it to the government. So it's not that the employer gets absolved from withholding tax because the event of payment of tax is deferred. The employer is equally bound to deduct tax at source and remit it to the government whenever those events happen. So the employee's tax will be deducted at source and it will be paid to the government. These amendments have come from the assessment year 21-22, which means that it applies to financial year 2021 and subsequent years. Earlier ESOPs did not have any of this facility. and therefore it was liable to tax when the exercise and allotment happens. As soon as the exercise happens and the allotment of shares is immediately carried out by the employer, then it would be a perquisite in the hands of the employee and it would be liable to tax. Here again, we have to be very careful that it is only the registered startups which qualify under 80 IAC would be eligible for this concession. Not all startups which have a common understanding would be eligible. It is the startup as defined under the Act that will be eligible for this concession. Any startup which is not so registered would continue to be governed by the earlier provision that as soon as the employee is going to exercise the option and get an allotment of shares, that employee would be liable to tax on the value of the perquisite. As I mentioned earlier, the value is the amount, fair market value of the shares on the date of allotment, less the exercise price which the employee is paid. So this is the crux on which the entire scheme of taxation works. Now, the difficulty is very clear that instead of cash compensation, the employer chose ESOP as a mechanism to reward the employees because of the advantages it has. But nevertheless, the disadvantages start visiting the employer as soon as the exercise period commences, because the employees have an option to exercise the option, but the cash crunch would continue to remain in the hands of the employee, or it will remain in the hands of the employer too, because they may not be able to pay the cash compensation at that point in time also. So certain option pay schemes you'll find are getting extended perpetually, because you find initial 10 years, 12 years also, you don't find the employees are able to exercise the option because they have not been in a position to ascertain whether the value of shares is adequate to pay the tax now and remain invested in the share at a subsequent point in time. These are the difficulties which startups typically face. In fact, many startups, I understand, go and even cancel the options and pay the employees risk because they find that the employees are going to occupy the capital space, but it may not be helpful to the employees nor to the management. And sometimes the startups get acquired by third parties and they don't want employee shares to remain outstanding. These negotiations, when they take place, the employers often go to the extent of saying that whatever is outstanding option, they will all be cancelled and the employees will be paid some cash compensation equal to the value of the option at that point in time. All these are very common features in a startup. What would be the tax treatment of an option which has not been exercised but nevertheless has been cancelled and a consideration has been paid for that? There are two views on that. So one view is to say it's a capital gain event. The other view is to say it's a salary income. Both views would require some amount of technical assistance from experts before you can take either of them. So I would not go into the technicalities of those views at this point in time. But what I wanted to possibly tell you is that options need not always be exercised. Some options can be cancelled and consideration can be paid, provided there are circumstances which are bona fide and business conditions warrant such cancellation of those options. A director or a promoter is not ordinarily eligible to be participating in a ESOP scheme. There's a prohibition, but up to 10 years they would qualify, and the MCA notification says so. Now, this is how when the sale of shares happen, again, the employee will have to find out whether shares which has been allotted to him or her has been held, how long it has been held. If it has been held for 2 years, then you presume that it is long term. If it has been held for less than, it's unlisted shares, and if it has been held for more than 2 years, then it would be long term capital gain. If it is held for less than 2 years, then it will be short term capital gain. Short term capital gain will be treated like ordinary income and it will be taxed at the same rate as other income would be taxable. Long term capital gain would be subject to tax at 20% plus surcharge, etc. You may even get an indexation benefit for the shares, depending on how when the share has been acquired. 2 years long means you will get 2 years indexation. Sometimes it's nice to wait at the right time so that you get an additional year of indexation. Instead of selling in March, it may be worthwhile selling in April because you get an extra year of indexation on the cost basis. As far as listed shares are concerned, very likely that startups may get the shares listed and the employee may be continuing to hold the shares which now are listed. In that case, they have to see whether the term of holding is the long term or short term. The rate of tax would be dependent. If it's a short term, it will be 15% plus surcharge plus education cess, etc. If it is long term, it will be 10% plus surcharge plus cess, etc. Now, as far as there are companies in startups which will result in buyback of shares because there is no marketability. The shares may not be unlisted shares, may not be capable of being sold in the market. There may not be buyers of those shares also. Promoters may not be interested to acquire the shares from the employees. Given these considerations, there could be occasions when the employer may choose to buy back the shares which have been allotted to the employees. A buyback cannot be specific to any group. A general buyback will be announced by the employer, and some promoters may not participate, so that the employees only participate in the buyback program, and they would get the value equal to the fair market value equal to the amount on the day on which the buyback is effected, which may be more than the excise price which they are paid. Then only the buyback would be effective in ordinary terms. So the employee gets the liquidity. The shares would get cancelled as far as the employer's company is concerned. And therefore, there's a new alignment of shareholding as far as the employer is concerned. I did mention that there are certain losses which would lapse in case the shareholding changes in particular time. Therefore, we have to be very careful to ensure that when the employee shares are bought out or there's a change in the shareholding, these events have to be closely monitored, so that because when a startup is acquired by a third party or some third party puts in more money into the startup, Section 79 would come into play. How to treat the 79, how to treat the ESOPs, how to treat the existing investors, all of them will have to be carefully monitored, so that if there are losses which the employer has incurred, those can be easily monitored. So I would possibly say that the ESOP is possibly the only tool of remuneration which is available to a startup. A promoter would not like to dilute his share is the concept on which we originally begin, but sooner or later, to acquire talent, he has to necessarily dilute, and the only mechanism in which he would dilute is to hire talent, pay the employees as part of ESOP, keep a substantial kitty for the employees so that they get a participation interest and they get a remuneration in kind, which in turn can be liquidated into cash at a much higher value. So as a leverage remuneration, one can go much higher in remuneration, one can get much less in remuneration also, but that is how the employers are going to reward the employees. With these words, I can take some questions. I find 2 or 3 QAs. Do employees equity usually not get diluted? Do the ESOP's equity usually not? ESOP per se is dilutive. That is why it requires a special resolution. Unless a special resolution is passed by the shareholders, a ESOP plan doesn't even get approved. So that means the shareholders are aware that as and when the options are issued and the grant happens and the exercise happens, the allotment happens, there would be a dilution as far as the promoter is concerned. The dilution is expected, it's known, it is built into the plan, and it's a known event. And promoters are conscious that it will result in dilution. The opposite of dilution is that if they don't want the dilution to happen, or they can initiate a buyback program. In the buyback program, they can certainly take back some of the shares, provided the promoters don't participate in the buyback program. Of course, there will be tax in consequence of allotment. There will be a tax consequence in the buyback that will have to be looked at. The next question I'm looking at. One more question. How is reverse vesting for founders implemented? I would not possibly, this is more of an arrangement of share capital than of the share capital, than of a ESOP program. A reverse vesting, according to me, is that the employer would possibly get an equal amount of shares as and when the employees are not able to exercise, is what you are looking at, I think. But I would say it has got nothing to do with ESOP plan. A ESOP plan cannot go into the employer's kitty. It will always remain in the employee's kitty. It has to be always allotted to those employees who are capable of receiving within the kitty. So qualifying employees can only receive under ESOP plan. No other person can receive under the ESOP plan. So promoters may be excluded from an ESOP plan if they are crossed the barrier of 10 years or they have got a higher shareholding already, and they may be barred from acquiring ESOP plans. So I would say ESOP is only for employees. In fact, those who are not employees may not even qualify to get the ESOPs.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir. This was truly an enlightening session. We are open to more questions and live questions.
There's one, how much shares needs to be diluted. This would all depend on the management. They can dilute as per the ESOP plan they draw up. Finally, it all boils down to the shareholder approval. If the shareholders are willing to approve more shares to be diluted, it will get valued. Do employees need to pay these base value to get vested shares? Normally, the base value is called the exercise price. The exercise price means that the price which the employee is required to pay for the shares, it could be even the face value of the share. Normally, many employees, when they design these kind of programs, they keep the face value of the shares as the exercise price because that is the incentive for the employee. After all, they are not getting a cash compensation. So the only way to get a compensation in turn is to ESOP as a mechanism of compensating them. That means that they would keep the face value as the value of the share, but these are not standards. The value could be even the fair market value of the share on the day of the allotment. So these are the options. This will all boil down to how the ESOP scheme is defined. If the ESOP scheme can provide so much of flexibility that it can, but it will normally be uniform. You cannot be selective. You cannot say the A employee will get at 10 rupees, B employee will get at 20 rupees, C employee will get 30 rupees unless it is linked to fair market value. That means the fair market value on the date of exercise could be sometimes the mechanism of allotment of shares, which is not going to be an incentive at all, because if I have to pay a fair market value to acquire the shares, then I must have extraordinary confidence in the shares to acquire the shares at that price. That's it.
Yes, I think that's it. But,
We have one more question, sir, in the Q&A
Yes,
box.
yes,
Yeah.
please, please.
So what's the question? I'm not able to see
So the
that.
question is, can exercise price be lower than the last transaction price or fair value?
Exercise price can be lower because exercise price is granted at the point of issuance of grant itself, when the grant is made. So the exercise price is fixed there. So the latest price may be lower than the exercise price. The exercise price could be lower, and very often it will be lower. Otherwise, it's not attractive at all, because which employee is going to make an exercise of an option when the value of the share is less than the exercise price? You will only make it when the value of the share is higher than the exercise price. So typically, exercise event happens only when the value of the share is higher. So if there is a round of money which has been raised at a higher value, the employee gets a signal that his share which he is going to acquire is more valuable than the amount of money he is going to pay. He would proceed to make the exercise of the option. Otherwise, he may not even exercise the option.
The question that's coming, sir, says, how about the sweat equity?
Sweat equity, as I said, is a different nomenclature, but the effects are all the same. The purpose of sweat equity is that I am a person who is a technocrat. I have know-how. I have got intellectual property rights which can be transferred to the company. Therefore, I am called in to make those contributions. So it is more like acquisition of rights rather than more like acquisition of rights, and therefore it would require some amount of it's like trading off for knowledge. The company acquires the IPR or know-how, and the employee gets a compensation. It would normally be a purchase of an asset in the ordinary parlance, because it comes from an employee basis. It is given a different treatment. So if I were to buy a know-how, I would pay for the know-how and pay the vendor the know-how equivalent value in shares. That will be a transaction of purchase of know-how using shares as the mechanism of settling the consideration. But if it's an employee who has contributed know-how, or he has got IPRs which he is contributing to the company and he needs to be compensated, he makes a value addition which is more in the IPR space, then he would certainly be entitled to some compensation. The rest of the compensation mechanism follows a typical ESOP plan. It will also go through the cycle of grant, vesting, exercise, allotment, and finally sale. So the events are common. The difference between ESOP and sweat equity is in the purpose for which is granted. ESOP is for services proper. It could be any services. It could be white collar services. It could be managerial services. It could be blue collar services. but sweat equity is more associated with know-how and IPRs.
Thank you, sir. Another question in that regard is, can a part-time consultant / expert ask for sweat equity?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can a part-time consultant / expert ask for sweat equity?
You can ask for, except that it will not come into the scheme of sweat equity as envisaged under the ESOP plan. It is like paying any other vendor a compensation in shares rather than a compensation in terms of cash. The only difference is that ESOP is a plan which gets approved by the shareholders on a kitty basis. That means you can get an approval for 1 lakh shares to be allotted to employees and start allotting 1,000 shares over a period of time. So you get an approval for a kitty, and that approval is used over a period of time by the management from time to time on a selection basis, that they will determine the qualification of employees and all. Vendors in India, at least in foreign countries, it's possible. In India, to pay the vendors through ESOP is not easy. It will be like issuing shares to acquire the services of goods or services, I may put it. That's like dealing with a vendor only. A vendor-based compensation is not easy in India. It is possible, but you have to require a specific approval from the shareholders. Again, it cannot be at a value less than the fair market value. That unlike employees, where the excise price can be the face value also, but in a vendor-based treatment, you will not be able to deal with that discounted price, because you will be required to issue shares under company law only at fair market value. Likewise, the transaction may result in other valuation disputes in income tax also. So vendor-based, compensating the vendors based on ESOP or shares is not going to be easy. One more aspect which needs to be kept in mind: a vendor rendering services for a moment will be liable to GST. A vendor providing goods also may be liable to GST. Just because we have paid the compensation in terms of shares doesn't mean that the GST liability will go. The GST liability will still have to be paid by the vendor if it is a forward charge vendor, or on reverse charge basis by the company in case it's a reverse charge basis. So dealing with vendors is a different dynamics would work compared to employees. The discussion today, so far we have dealt only with ESOP to employees. The moment we come to vendors, it is a compensation proper. We don't have to look at it whether it's a ESOP scheme at all.
Thank you so much, sir. Saina, we don't have any more questions. I think there was a flood of questions already.
Yes, all right.
Over to you, Taina.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Srinivasan. Really appreciate your effort while on the move. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay. And yes, thank you, Srinivasan, sir. On a concluding note, I thank all our esteemed panelists for taking.
I'm sorry, Taina, we have just one more question. The sincere request from
Please,
the
please, please.
Mr. Srinivasan, it's a
Please.
long one. Sweat equity is allowed to directors and employees. Understandably, it's factored on outstanding work or contribution. Please highlight in the difference in pricing in sweat equity versus ESOP.
Yes, sweat equity, automatically it means that the group is not a wholesome group. It is a group which makes contribution of know-how. It is a group which is going to make contribution of IPRs. So it cannot be a universal plan. It has to be a very specific plan, identified group. So it cannot be that I will create a sweat equity pool and then start looking for IPR. So it will more or less, it will be dovetailed into that I have got 5 employees, and these 5 employees are going to contribute know-how, or they are so managerial, they are so key value adders that they will qualify for additional nice treatments from the management. So it will be not like a ESOP plan. It will be a little more very specific. It will think of what are the areas in which it can look for compensation using sweat equity. So it will be a very small diluted plan. It cannot be a wide range plan like a ESOP, which is permitted under the company law like a standard plan. So I do agree that directors may qualify for sweat equity in certain cases because they have the IPs, they have the know-how, and they are promoted in many cases, the companies. Certain key employees may have the IPs which they want to contribute to the company and get a compensation for. These are the kind of things which will qualify as a sweat equity. The differentiation is more in the level of services. Yeah, ordinary services by employees, ESOP. Very know-how services from employees or directors would be more like sweat equity. Sweat equity will be a very narrow gap, very narrow band of allotments.
Thank you, sir. Attendees, we've just now circulated an email ID. You can please send all your queries to that email address. We're sorry we won't be able to take any further questions. Saina, over to you for conclusion and closing.
Yes. Thank you, Akshay. And again, thank you to all our esteemed panelists. This was truly an enriching session and only the beginning of the marathon. We look forward to the successive sessions. A big thank you to all the attendees for taking out the valuable time, and gratitude to Sing and Sing to be hosting this in conjunction with us. And on a concluding note, I request all of you to follow us on our social media handles for all the latest updates on the technology startup ecosystem. Please don't forget our motto: innovate, connect, collaborate. Let's make technology transform and integrate. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Saina, seeking your permission now to end the webinar for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Akshay. Thank you for your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much.